Hello everybody. We're here today to talk about clinical trials for patients with sickle cell, and I'm delighted to welcome Kathleen, who's a patient with sickle cell, who's going to talk through her experience with being on a clinical trial. Just before we start, just to explain, and for everyone else, what a clinical trial is. It's thinking about assessing something, whether it's a new medicine or a new test, to see what it's like compared to routine care. So, for example, to see what a new drug is like compared to existing treatments. And most trials that we do are actually what we call randomised controlled trials, which means we have two groups of people, one who's on existing care and one who's on the new treatment, so that we can compare to see if the new drug is better than the existing care. And when we do that, neither the doctor nor the patient knows whether they're on the new drug or not. So it'd be good just really to think about your experience from the off about having the GBT clinical trial.
I had a clinic appointment with Dr. Howard, and we were discussing my care and how I was feeling, and I said I had a crisis, and she thought, oh well, we have a trial and you needed to have had a crisis recently and be on hydroxy. And I thought, oh, so that means I qualify for the trial, which was great. And so she said, yeah, you can. So I filled out the forms, did a lot of tests. There's a lot of tests involved. And I had to fill out a diary over a period. I think it was about 6 weeks or maybe 3 months. I filled out a diary. So I hadn't gone on a trial, just doing the diary to see how I was emotionally, physically throughout that period before I could go on the drug. And then in December 2017, I started the trial. Started taking the drug, which was good. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you went through, we call it a screening process, so that's to make sure you qualify or are eligible, and that means questions about your history in terms of how many crises you have, for example, but also blood tests to check your kidney function, your liver function. There's a lot of things that happen, and if you're eligible and you want to do it, then you essentially can be consented for the trial and start it.
Yeah.
So how did you find being on the trial? How is it different from normal care?
I had a lot of hospital visits. I had a lot of tests. I had to come in more frequently, and every time I came in, the trial nurse would take my bloods because it couldn't be taken by the general person, and I had to have an ECG. I had a lot of tests every time just to make sure that I was healthy and it wasn't affecting me in a negative way. So yeah, I think it was quite good. You felt you were being looked after. So yeah, I found it very good. Yeah.
So I think you probably had quite a lot of contact with the research team.
I did.
In terms of extra phone calls or emails to check in.
So if I had side effects, for example, I would contact and say, oh, this is happening, what do I do? And they'll advise me. If I had another issue separate from the sickle and my GP prescribed medication, I'll have to contact the trial team to say, I've been prescribed this drug, can I take it or not? And they'll go through a list and then come back and say, you can't take it, you can take this instead, or yeah, it's fine. So I was looked after.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably worth sort of putting into context what that actually meant in terms of more intense consults, because normally, because you're on hydroxy, aren't you?
Yeah.
You'd be seen every 3 months.
That's
I think
correct.
you were being seen every month in clinic.
Yeah.
And it was probably a lot more questions than normal about side effects.
To be honest, to start with, I think it was every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Then it went to every month. And then I think about a year or two down the line, it went into every 2 months.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was seeing quite a lot.
Yeah.
And I was being checked to make sure nothing's going wrong, nothing untoward. And if there was an issue, they would recheck, do bloods. If it's an MRI or whatever, there was a detailed study to make sure the drug wasn't affecting me in a negative way.
Sure.
So yeah.
Okay, so I think, that's a really important point, isn't it? Because obviously fitting into someone's lifestyle, it is definitely more intense than normal clinics. But obviously everything's clear at the beginning how the program is in terms of how many visits. So.
Yeah, and how we would work, yes. Yeah. And I knew that it was blind. I was told it was blind, so I didn't know whether I was on the real drug or not. Yeah. But obviously when I started having side effects. I thought I must be on it because otherwise, why would I be having side effects? It can't be a placebo. And yeah, it was good. I'm glad I did it. I don't regret it. And yeah, it changed my life really.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So that's interesting, isn't it? Because I think clinical trials, sometimes it's got an obvious positive consequence for the individual patient, and I think you certainly feel that for you, being on the study drug.
Yeah.
And some trials actually are different to that. Perhaps it's more about thinking about sickle patients in the future, in the near future, whether it's potentially new drug to benefit other people. But I think you were really lucky you got the study drug, and that was really good for you.
Yeah, I did. And yeah, and it was about balancing the dosage as well, because there was a time when I was taking, I think we start with 7, and then they reduced it to 5, because based on how I was reacting, so that's how they calculated the dosage for the general population when it's released. So I figured that out.
Absolutely. You touched a bit on side effects, and I think what's really important is obviously clinical trials are thinking about whether this new drug, which means it's an experimental drug, is okay for working for this population, in this case sickle cell obviously. And so it's important to note that because it's an experimental drug, we probably know some side effects from the earlier trials, but we might not know all of them. So that's why we're so keen on so many visits, and there's different numbers of visits depending on which trial it is as well, so that's monitored.
And I think Dr. Howard was quite conscious of the side effects, so if she wasn't happy with it, she will tell me to stop taking it for a while so we can see why. And it wasn't like they were risking everything. I was risking everything just to get this trial through. They were cautious, and so I didn't feel at risk at any time, because I knew that when something happened, we would look into it. I'll reduce the dose or stop for a bit and then go back on it. And through that, we worked. So I never felt at risk.
There are a lot more rules around trials than there are with normal healthcare. So obviously the patient's in the driving seat. So I know you got on well with it, but had you chosen to leave it at any time?
I could. Oh yes, I had the option to. I can still leave it as if I wanted to, but obviously I can see the effect it had on me, and so I thought, no, there's no way I'm leaving it, because my whole purpose of being on the trial was to stay alive, and so it's changed the quality of life. So yeah.
Right. So just wondering, Kathleen, if you had any reservations about being part of a clinical trial?
Well, apparently, historically, there was this issue where black people were used in trials that weren't in a positive light. So I know that there's a lot of people out there that would be worried about taking on a trial. But I was at that point where I needed something to change in my life, so I went through with this. And it's not I don't feel at risk, you know, and I'm trying to say that to people who are out there, you know, worried about taking on a trial. Because at the end of the day, you have sickle cell, you probably pass it on to one of your generation down the line. So you want to make sure there is something there's a cure, something working towards that, which is why clinical trial comes in, I'll take a risk, because it's worth it. If it means you're healthy and, you know, it's going to give you a quality of life, then yeah, I'll do that.
Okay, great to hear. Thank you for being with us, Kathleen. That's great.